Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Brazilian spiritual experiences. Hey/X/ I've been meaning to create a thread about some events in the past 2 months or so of my life, where my worldview on the paranormal and the afterlife flipped on its head in a very personal way. I figure there's no better time than now, alone and drinking some wine, to tell some of these things to you. I don't want my personal experience to permeate your worldview as much as document it for all to see for themselves. About 2 months or so, maybe more, my father was involved with some weird types, and priestesses swayed his perspective through fortune-telling. Across all of our state, they all said the same. He'd either be killed or sentenced to jail, which is for all intents and purposes a death sentence in my country. He was convinced, and thus began this ongoing spiritual journey, ending very well for him. Before we go any further, I'd like to add some context to Brazilian cults. Some long time ago, the country had slaves, and they were brought against their will from many parts of Africa. Though their faiths were diverse, the new reality Brazil imposed caused some sort of ecumenism in their religions. The so-called orixás are archetypes, energies, as my father told me, which incarnated in African figures, energies that represent either some part of the world or the human psyche, and they lay claim over people like a shepherd over sheep. For example, my orixá is Zango, the god of justice, while my father's is Ogum, the god of war. These entities were secretly worshipped through Catholic saints, associating each deity with some Christian figure, for example St. George with Ogum, and sometimes turned overtly satanic, as is the case with the Exus, and these are the more important entities in my story. Exus are essentially guardian angels. Though their general demeanor exudes a demonic aesthetic, they're little more than spiritual guides and material helpers. One, through appeasing his or her own Exu, can acquire what they desire, and such happened with my father, who escaped his previous dangerous life. The Exus demand altars and gifts such as alcohol and cigars, which they claim allows them to spread, filter, and control the energy of a place. Yes, they claim, as Exus can speak to you, through a host. All have an Exu, and this Exu can, should you be spiritually initiated enough, possess you in order to do as he or she pleases. Nothing too ominous, as my father and mother do little more than drink copious amounts of alcohol and smoke tons of cigars. Strangely enough, hosts do not feel the effects of alcohol intoxication at all, and multiple times I saw my father down entire bottles of whiskey only to return completely sober, he who couldn't afford to drink a few beers at a time. The Exus, besides altars, alcohol, and cigars, also demand offerings of raw meat and a special mandioca flour, often with a special type of oil and cigars and/or flowers. These pots, almost akin to meals, are left to rot near their altars and are disposed in green soil afterwards, a crucial step in their rituals. The smell of rotten meat is sometimes unsettling for an outsider, but even worse are instances where the hosts eagerly consume these meals, as did my father, who ate an entire raw cow liver. The possessions may occur seemingly at random, though not all end in such debauchery. 2 times I was called before my father's Exu to be cleansed. My mother and I stood before him. His name is Seven, the King of Crossroads, and he compelled us to make our wishes. Wealth, protection, success, anything, and afterwards he'd spread the cigar's smoke and the alcohol over us. I remember my first ritual of cleansing. A priestess and 3 or 4 other people came to our apartment. They'd rub herbs, a life rooster, and a bag of popcorn on us and the walls before ripping open the rooster and stuffing him with the aforementioned herbs and popcorn. These carcasses full of negative energy are then disposed of in a graveyard or such. I even came to be part of an exorcism. Agons, as we call them, are the tormented spirit of the dead, attracted to light and people, following them home only to plague their lives. My father spoke of their behavior, how they'd drop kitchen utensils in order to lick their contents, not unlike Buddhist hungry ghosts. A tip for all of you: don't light up candles during the first days of November, as it is when Egons leave their graveyards and roam the streets, only to follow the light of your candles into your homes. All in my family had sessions with the priestess. It was a square surrounded by guia, little collar things made of beads with the colors of the respective orixás. She'd throw small conches only to be able to guess, right in front of you, your most intimate secrets. My cousin and uncle cried in their sessions. and the priestess discovered, despite me and my father being completely clueless about my mother's cancer, which she had been hiding from us. My session was nothing special. She did mention me being too spiritually closed off for her to see anything, but assured I had a greater purpose in our judicial system as a magistrate. I mentioned Buddhism as I've been a firm follower, even though my father often disagrees with their core tenets. My father is what some call a medium, an intermediary between this world and the next, with naturally highly developed spiritual senses, as have the priests and the exes said. He mentions the existence of an immortal spirit, a fragment of the Godhead, a great architect, a creator of all, a cycle of rebirth in order to perfect one's soul and escape samsara, and the possibility to be an exu in the afterlife willingly. Almost as if it were a company, you can join them in their work. All this time I've been somewhat skeptical of the metaphysical aspects of Buddhism, even taking it as a purely materialistic religion, though these past few months did reveal a new dimension of the world and I don't really know how to integrate it back into the general collective perspective. If exes can simply give us a boost in anything, is that fair at all? I see how God is still here, yet there is a disconnect between all of the world and my life experience, almost dreamlike how nothing really makes sense without these personal truths. Yet I must go on pretending. This might be my last reply if this thread doesn't spark anyone's interest. Feel free to ask anything and I'll detail some events or relay questions to my father.
Can you please explain the difference between Palo Monte Mayombe, Kimabanda and Umbanda? Do all of them use human skulls and bones, etc.? I'm from Argentina.
No idea what Palo Monte is, but my father says Quimbanda and Umbanda diverge on their hierarchy and deities, while Umbanda worships the Orixás and deal with their exus, essentially employees of the Orixá. Quimbanda deals solely with exus, who don't seem to answer to no authority. Also, I should add there are dark sects in Umbanda, particularly priests and priestesses who can control and converse with exus, using them for more vile, targeted purposes. I have some time now, so I'll add a few events. I said we can ask Seven for anything we may want, and that's true, as I did ask of him to heal my pets. Gross negligence turned them sick right when this whole ordeal started. I gave him a bottle of rum as a gift, and he instructed me and my mother to fill the altar with popcorn, throwing it away on green soil the next day. We call this despacho, as in dispatching the offering. For a while, my pet's condition would only worsen, to the point I threatened Seven out loud. A bit tongue-in-cheek, I said I'd grind their altars with seawater. The exus fear the sea and seawater, something to do with the great shore between life and the afterlife, which would prevent them from coming back. As such, exus usually don't fare well with the children of Yemanja, the goddess of the sea. That day, as I left the vet clinic, a black man wearing red and black, the colors of Seven, saluted me out of nowhere. These encounters can be quite common, and though nothing seems unusual at first, they may disappear in the blink of an eye, as has been told to me by my mother from her own experiences. The colors of the Orixás and exus are displayed as necklaces of colorful beads, following their colors and aesthetic of Kure. Zango is white and red, Yemanja is a bright pale blue. Bara has an iron chain, and Ogum a red, white, and green collar. These pieces are simultaneously used for worship and spiritual guidance, as in one may ask and pray to their Orixá through their collars, and the collars of exus will protect you from evil while you're out in the streets. These must be sanctified by a priestess and never washed, nor should one wear them in any kind of sexual activity.
Be me. I work as a cook in a dive. It's around midnight on a weekday and we're closing. The kitchen is closed, I'm cleaning. The waitress comes to the kitchen saying some strange people came demanding for food. The boss told me to do it. Great. But okay, I get paid for overtime. The waitress tells me to take a look at them. A middle-aged couple and 3 teenagers. Never saw them around. I've grown up in this neighborhood and I know everyone. They came walking, no car in sight. And none. Look at their faces. It looked like they were using those realistic face silicone masks, but the texture was leathery. They ordered 22-ounce beers and 2 loaded fries, 3 pounds of loaded fries, made the fries and sent them, turned off the fryer again. 5 minutes later, the plates come back empty. But not empty. They were full of saliva. I think it was saliva because that's the only thing I can think of. Some translucent, foul-smelling goo. One huge puddle of saliva on each plate. Go take a second look at them. They pay and leave quickly, speaking only the most necessary. They leave on foot. Empty beers at the table. The teenagers drank nothing. The waitress says they devoured the freeze and drank the beer like beasts. I didn't hear them talking to each other at all. Next day my boss doesn't remember it happening. Never saw the family again. It was 2 years ago and I still don't know what happened. Sorry about my bad green texting skills. I'm a tourist from CK and mostly a lurker.
That was pretty good, Anon, and interesting. Where, not specifically, did this happen?
Metropolitan region of São Paulo, Brazil.
This happened between 1986 and 1989. My uncles and cousins lived in Lame, an area in the extreme south of Porto Alegre, Brazil. My uncle, now deceased, had a small boteco, Brazilian restaurant. In that region, and at that time, the nearest neighbor was more than a kilometer away. Pasture and centenary trees predominated the landscape. To serve the region, there were 2 buses in the morning and 2 more in the early evening. At that time, there were rumors that a very large animal, with the body of a man and the head of an animal, had been seen nearby, and it was said that it attacked both animals and people. Several people claimed to have been attacked by this monster and luckily escaped. Others swore they had lost an ox or 2 to the creature. My aunt, very skeptical and dedicated to her children and day-to-day chores, did not like to pay attention to these inventions of the people, as she said. However, one day her disbelief was put to the test. She and one of my cousins were returning home by bus, already in the dark of night. Less than 10 people were on the bus, when in a certain part of the journey, something very large came out of the bush and hit the right side of the bus, and returned to the bush. The crash caused the driver, perhaps out of fright, to lose control and brake sharply, stopping partially in a ditch. Despite the scare, there were no injuries, but people were very scared by that event. The driver got very irritated and left the bus mumbling and cursing, going to check the damage and at the same time calling for help. Being in the dark and still a long way from home, everyone stayed in their places. A few minutes after the driver left, everyone heard a strange grunt which could not be from an animal or human being, according to the witnesses. People panicked and started crowding right next to the conductor's chair. Silence took over the people. Everyone was attentive to all external sounds when, without warning, a new knock was given on the same side of the bus. Everyone got up and ran to the other side. Some of the people began to cry and pray. One lady became out of control, and my aunt, very afraid, remained to protect her son. At that moment, the bus began to be violently shaken, as if something or something was shaking the vehicle from side to side. The dread grew as the bus rocked. It looked like it would be overturned at any moment. Looking through the windows, you could see a large figure outside, but you couldn't tell what it was. Without the slightest warning, everything stopped, and whatever was causing it started to make its way toward the front of the bus, where the door was open. At that moment, my aunt was so terrified that she wanted to die and not see what was attacking them. Even before the creature entered the bus, it was possible to smell a terrible, rotten, unbearable smell. Everyone fled to the back of the bus and huddled in a corner, which made them look like a single, shapeless mass of people huddled together. Those who had the courage to look swear to have seen a large, naked man with dark skin, a huge goat's head, with huge horns and yellow eyes, who ran to the turnstile and stopped. He spent a few seconds straining and huffing angrily before turning around, getting off the bus, and disappearing into the bushes. Unbridled crying took over people. People were in shock, totally terrified. A few long minutes passed when another bus pulled alongside this one. Another driver, who was called to help the damaged bus, was informed of what had happened and left to find the first driver, who had not yet returned. Luckily, he was walking along the side of the road, returning from the place he called the bus company. The military brigade was activated, and ambulances, experts, radio, and television came. The case was covered for a few months, with newspaper articles and interviews with the victims. Search parties searched for the creature's tracks, but they were never found. Several theories were formulated about what would have attacked the bus, but nothing is proven. Apart from some dead animals, which were attributed to the creature, nothing else happened. Nowadays, that region is populated and very different from the time when the events occurred, leaving the mystery of the creature that attacked the bus lost and without explanation.
Back in 2001, when I was 10 years old, I lived in a farm here in Brazil. We used to have housekeepers, and one of them was a maid that once told me a curious story. She lived in the Amazon rainforest in a small city in the state of Pará. She told me that if you are alone and near the boundaries of the forest, you may hear someone calling your name, wanting you to enter the forest. Most of the time, according to her, it's a familiar voice. Parents, siblings, closest friends, etc. She told me that when she were younger, she was doing laundry in her house, which had this backyard surrounded by the entire forest, and heard her mother yelling in the forest. She stopped her chores and tried to focus on the yell. Again, she heard it. It was her mother. But she also felt something wasn't right, because she remembered her mother was in another place, not in the forest. The yell got closer and said her name. Auxiliadora, her name. Come here, please, I need your help. She told me that the voice sounded awkward, soulless, weird. She locked herself home alone until her parents got home. Her mother told her it was, name of entity, I forgot, and she did right by not going there, and that many people were forever lost in the woods because of this entity. Connecting the dots, today I link it to skinwalkers or something similar.
These stories didn't happen with me, but with my family. I want to start by explaining how my father grew up in the 60s and 70s. It was a very small rural city called Jabote in the countryside of the estate of Paraná in Brazil. In the early 60s, my grandfather came to this almost untouched place where he started to build his house. Up to this day, this very little farm belongs to my family. My father was the second oldest son out of 4. When he was 7 years old, my grandfather passed away in a car accident. A few years after that, my grandmother married again, with a man that already had 4 kids from his first marriage. His first wife also had died. When this happened, my father, that I'll call H, was about 14, his brother, J, was 16, and the oldest son of his stepfather, Z, also was 16. They went to school at night after working at the fields during the day. It was a 3-kilometer walk from home to school. One night when they were coming back home, in total darkness, they started hearing a horse walking behind them. They could hear his horseshoes hitting the rocks on the road and the sounds of little bells and other metal ornaments people used to put on their horses. It's not unusual to hear a horse in the middle of a city surrounded by farms, but they started to think it was strange the horse was not catching up with them. By the pace of the horse steps, it should have passed by. They stopped by the road thinking it might be their stepfather. The sound of the horse kept coming until it was very close, and then suddenly, just silence. No horse. After a few minutes, they decided they should head home. As soon as they started walking, the sound came back. Again, no horse. They started to run. As they ran, so did the horse after them, and the noise kept increasing. When they got to the gate of their farm, the noise stopped. It was a very big wooden gate, almost 2 meters high. J decided to go home. It was another 300 meters ahead. When he was almost halfway there, H gave up waiting and went home too. Z said he would wait. He was sure it was his father and would open the gate for him. He saw from some distance the outline of the horseman, the light from the stars shining on him. He was coming to the gate. What he described next was a big horse, huge, way bigger than the gate, and on the horse a man wearing a hat. The scariest was the fact that he could see through the horse and its rider. Terrified, he froze, staring at that thing. The rider made a noise and the horse moved towards the gate, making it creak. At this moment, he started to run towards the house and screamed, "Run!" He turned around to see what was going on, just in time to see the rider fade out. When he turned to run, Z had already passed by him. When H and J got home, he was already there, all white on the ground, absolutely terrified. He could not believe what he just saw.
I live in Brazil. It's Babylon. It's very Sodom and Gomorrah, the very meaning of iniquity. Always has been. Iniquity in the strictest sense. When morals cease to be de rigueur, when even hypocrisy disappears, it being vice's tribute to virtue, when the ethics of thieves and pimps become the norm and the righteous are regarded with scorn, Otario succor being the name they give lawful men in this den of despair. The favela chieftain's girlfriend bearing her ass as she twerks and sways like a python to a funk prohibidao before the eyes of children and the elderly, not a single scowl of recrimination among witnesses. These lustful displays now a regular feature of the landscape. How quickly the normie masses grow used to new depths of depravity. We have around 50,000 annual homicides, incidentally. Every Brazilian has been robbed at gunpoint at least a few times in his life. They will take your cash, your phone, your laptop, your car, and if they feel like it, they will lodge a bullet in your skull even if you comply. And yet most Brazilians have no firearms and feel no need to own one. They accept their vulnerable status like a fact of nature, a nation of dumb cucks. Our rich are largely a small mandarinate of government workers whose obscenely high salaries are paid by the cash pilfered from our pockets in the form of taxes. We have record-breaking taxes. Among the world's nations, we come first on high-tax statistics and last on student performance statistics. A small caste of rich fucks living off the backs of the numberless poor. Do I exaggerate for effect? Not that much, really. Something fucked about this country, like promiscuity and violence and theft are in the very ether. That joke about why Jesus wasn't born in Mexico or Poland, couldn't find 3 wise men or a virgin, suits Brazil best, and we even have a town called Bethlehem.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup,